Will out, we could either continue on with Proverbs, but I didn't really want to do that because I would step on potentially some of what he was working on. So the other option was one of the wisdom books, which Will, prior to this summer, had been working through in the books of the Old Testament. And we had already done Job. And so the only options left were either Ecclesiastes or Song of Solomon. And so we're going to be doing Ecclesiastes tonight. And if you have a special request for Song of Solomon, you can bring that up with Will when he gets back, and we'll go forward from there. But Ecclesiastes is, first of all, if you've been in Sunday school when we were teaching through hermeneutics, some of this may sound familiar, but hopefully with the repetition, this is helpful as we're seeking to lock in messages of the book. But Ecclesiastes is one of those books that is somewhat enigmatic, and a lot of times when reading through, it can seem almost like, what is the purpose of this book here? So we want to be careful as we go through it so that we are thinking right thoughts about the book, recognizing that this is God-breathed, and so it has been given to make us equipped for every good work. So Ecclesiastes, what you have is an outline of the book, and we'll get to that. A little bit of a preliminary background. Ecclesiastes is written by Solomon, and most likely it is towards the end of his life. So we're talking probably around 931 BC or so. So we have really three books written by Solomon, and Song of Solomon a little more early in his life, the book of Proverbs more towards the middle of his life, and then Ecclesiastes at the end. And we know the trajectory of Solomon as he had a really good start, and then we see as he continues through his life, he gets dragged aside by the allurement of sin and ultimately fails and sins against the Lord. But then we have the book of Ecclesiastes, which is written at the end of his life, which seems to indicate that there has been a repentance and a rethinking of his life, and he's passing on these lessons that he has learned to others. So again, this book is a little more difficult. It's a little more misunderstood when we look at wisdom literature. And in some ways, perhaps, it's like the book of Job, if you remember when we went through that, in that Job is usually approached as read the first couple chapters, read the last few chapters, and ignore virtually everything in between, when it's actually what's in between that develops the meaning of the book. And Ecclesiastes, in perhaps a similar way, is not quite as cut and dried as the book of Proverbs is, where you look at it and you can see a proverb and immediately, wow, okay, that makes sense. Aha. A soft answer turns away wrath. Yep, I saw that today. Grievous words stir up anger. Got it. Makes sense. I need to apply that. Ecclesiastes, though, you have to read the entire book to understand what Solomon is developing. And as well as we approach it, if we take it in bits and pieces, we can come to erroneous conclusions on the book. But it's in the Bible, doctrine of inspiration. We look at this and we expect to find God's truth for life in it. Specifically, how do we change? How do we live? How do we think? And so when we come to Ecclesiastes, we see several groups of people who need wisdom who will benefit from this book. So first category, the person who is very, very common today, the person who sees this life as the end that they are pursuing, whether that's I must have a great deal of money. I must be the best in my field. I must be a hedonist that enjoys my life, and this life only has the meaning that I give to it. And so I'm going to do that through that which life provides. And God is nowhere in that picture, or perhaps God is somewhere on the periphery. And God is a tool to make me successful. So that would be one person who would benefit from the wisdom of Solomon in Ecclesiastes. Another category of person who would benefit from this, a person who looks around at life and they recognize something is very, very wrong. We see these structures that are supposed to provide things like justice and righteousness in society, and yet they're not. You see relationships like marriage that are supposed to provide satisfaction and they don't. Or you see work that is supposed to provide some sense of meaning, right? And it doesn't. Or you do all the right things. I did everything correct and it didn't work. How do I think about that? And so Ecclesiastes provides wisdom for that man. The person who questions how he ought to live in the sin cursed world. How do we think about how do we live our daily lives? Or maybe similarly, the person who sees life as some sort of burden to be endured, and you're just supposed to be an ascetic because this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through, so I'm just gonna plow my way through, and it's gonna be miserable, and I'm gonna make sure I don't enjoy any of it because that seems to be the more spiritual option. Well, Ecclesiastes answers all of those and provides us with a biblically informed worldview. So, a couple different interpretations when people come to the book of Ecclesiastes, because they'll come and they'll read things like chapter 1, verse 10. Is there anything of which one might see? See, this is new. Already it has existed for ages which were before us. There's no remembrance of earlier things, and also of later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. You go, well, that seems not very encouraging. And I'm just going through and just glancing through. Chapter 3, verse 16. Furthermore, I've seen under the sun that in that place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. Drop down to verse 19. The fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there's no advantage for man over beast, for all this is vanity. Like, isn't that a blessing? Don't you just read that and your heart is warmed? Obviously, tongue in cheek, because it doesn't seem to be encouraging, certainly not like Romans 8:1. Therefore, there's no condemnation to those who are in Christ. That's one thing. Hearing you're going to die like a dog and rot like a dog and everybody's going to forget about you is not exactly as encouraging. And so some people come to Ecclesiastes and they view it through the lens of maybe the author is a pessimistic skeptic. Everything is meaningless. I mean, that's how the book starts, right? Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Okay. Uh, thanks, Solomon. So maybe then this is the bitter ramblings of a disenfranchised old man at the end of his life. And some people will argue that. Other people will take the opposite and say, well, maybe this message is one of hedonism. You're going to die. It doesn't really matter. So just live it up. Carpe the diem and just live your life however you can. Third category of interpretation would be the existentialist. Nothing makes sense. Don't worry about trying to make sense of life because it's not going to make sense. So you're going to go through life and you're going to say, how does this make sense? And it's not going to make sense. And as soon as you realize it doesn't make sense, it's all going to make sense because it doesn't make sense, right? And yet none of that squares well with the doctrine of inspiration, and that Jesus could say that all of Scripture points to him. And so I would argue that the best interpretation of this book is that it is a reflection for the wise that provides a biblical philosophy of life. It tells us how we should think and live in a sin cursed world. It describes man and it describes life in a post Edenic Genesis 3 type world. And so we see, as we go through, themes of the curse. We see themes of toil and death, which begin in Genesis 3. We see themes of aloneness and foolishness. What is man's purpose? What is good? What is not good as man is living his life? A couple interpretational considerations. The first is when we come to the very second verse of the book, we have the famous line, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity." So the first thing we have to understand is, what does this mean, and how do we then understand this as the key to unlocking the book? So most translations will have it translated something like vanity or meaninglessness, almost like emptiness. And yet, I would argue this is a poor translation because it doesn't capture really the richness of the word here. Because, for instance, if everything is emptiness, and you could close the book after verse 2, right? Everything is meaningless. There's no meaning in anything. Okay, well, if that's true, there's no meaning to this book. So close the book and be on with your day. Also, if that's what it means, there's some usages in Ecclesiastes where that just doesn't work. So, for instance, in chapter 2, verse 26, "For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight." And he says this too is vanity and striving after wind. You could go, well, wait a minute, how is that meaningless? Like, how does that fit together? And the answer is, it really doesn't. And so, meaningless or vanity is not a great translation of the term. And there's some other passages we could look at that would reinforce that. But in essence, the essence of the term is a rather broad meaning that's hard to capture in one English word. Sort of like chesed, the loving kindness of the Lord. It's loyal love, covenant love, loving kindness. It's just kind of one of those terms that's kind of difficult to capture in one word. But Havel, as used in Ecclesiastes, has, we might say, three major heads to it and what it could mean, or the meaning that it's trying to communicate. The first is that it can mean the idea of transient, something that's brief, almost like soap bubbles. You know, you see them and they're beautiful and there's all these color swirls and you go, oh, that's really pretty, and pop, it's gone. Very, very brief. That's Havel. The second head of what this encapsulates is enigmatic, hard to understand. Now, when you're looking at something and you go, but it was all working out and suddenly everything just went wrong. That's hard to understand. Right, that's Havel. And then the third head that we could look at as to what this encapsulates is the idea of frequently unsatisfying. So it's like when you go, I wish I had oodles and oodles and oodles of money, and then something happens and bam, you're a multi-millionaire, and you go, this is great, I have everything I wanted, and then you realize it does not satisfy. That's Havel. So transient, hard to understand, and frequently unsatisfying is what this word is communicating to us, not meaningless. So Havel, there's also the term that we see, especially in the first half of the book, the term under the sun. This phrase refers to man's life with a man-centered perspective. How does it look from where we stand as we evaluate life? Well, some structural considerations here, and it's not immediately apparent to us when we first glance over the book, but Ecclesiastes is a structured book. And so when we come to Ecclesiastes, there's 222 poetic verses in it. And if we divide that in half, we have 111 that take us from the first verse to chapter 6, verse 9. And then there's 111 that take us from chapter 6, verse 10, all the way to the end of the book. And that actually provides the framework for understanding the book, because the first half through chapter 6, verse 9, there's a key question that is being addressed. What good is there for man to do? So, for instance, in chapter 2, verse 3, I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could, here it is, see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven in the few years of their lives. That's what the first half of the book addresses. What good is there for man to do? And through the first half of the book, that's where we have this phrase, striving after wind, that keeps coming up. It's the idea of you're chasing something that you can't get, and even if you could get it, there's nothing there. This is also where we see the phrase, there is nothing better than to enjoy life. So, for instance, in chapter 2, verses 24 and 25, there's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and to tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after wind. We see that in chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. We see that in chapter 5, verses 18 and 19. This theme again of there's nothing better, chapter 3, verse 12, than for them to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Chapter 5, verse 18. Here's what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, to enjoy oneself and all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. This is his reward. So this theme keeps popping up. What is good? Well, there's nothing better to enjoy, nothing better than to enjoy life. So now, as men and women of Scripture, we come to that and we say, okay, so what is this recommending? Is this recommending some sort of reckless hedonism by which we just enjoy life and just take it one day at a time and just chill and enjoy a good meal, because that's all the meaning there is? John.
So this whole thing, this whole first half, I just keep hearing continually a tacit acknowledgement of God, not a devotion. I hear a tacit admission of God of someone without a mission or direction or acknowledgement that God is the one that's in control. I don't see where he actually, I mean, he says it, but he doesn't devote to the idea that God is in control of everything. And he also doesn't glorify God in this. It's hard for me to continue to find, other than maybe just some snippet someplace.
Yeah, and that's
I I see that, because our purpose
Mhm.
for being here is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
This old boy here is having a tough time making that graph or arriving at that conclusion.
Yeah. So that brings up the question then, what is he doing in this section? Why is he bringing up these questions and wrestling with them?
I think vanity. I think the term that he uses with vanity has so much to do with it. It's the it's not the pleasure of, but it's life centered around self instead of centered around
Mhm.
God.
Yeah. If we're living life the way that most people, frankly, live life, is that, to take the first half of the book, is that good? Because you ask anybody out on the street, what is a good life? And they're going to say it's being smart, it's having a lot of money, it's having a successful job, it's having a whole bunch of toys, it's all this. That is a good life. And here Solomon is wrestling with the question, is it? Is it really? And so the first half of the chapter, and we're gonna circle back to this and start working through some specifics. But the second half of the book then addresses a different issue. It addresses man's inability to understand God's work. So, for instance, chapter 6, verse 12. For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? So the question there is that man is unable to understand God's work. And yet, what we see when we go to the very next few verses in chapter 7, we see that there is wisdom that's given to man to live in an uncertain world. So, this question, then in chapter 7 through chapter 8, verse 17, we have this question, who knows what is good for man? And we'll see as we go through, there's a whole bunch of unexpected things that are highlighted through chapter 7 that are good for man, that don't intuitively make sense. We come to the end of that section in chapter 8, verse 17, and we have this phrase repeated, man is not able to discover. And I saw every work of God. I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover. And though the wise men should say, I know, he cannot discover. So we have the second half of the book that's divided into these kind of two major subsections. Man cannot discover what is good. We're going to see parenthetically, intrinsically in and of himself. And then starting with chapter 9 and going through chapter 11, verse 6, you have the second question of the second half, which is, who can tell a man what will be after him? What's going to happen? And the answer that we see in this section is, you don't know. So chapter 11, verses 5 and 6, just as you do not know the path of the wind, how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. So your seed in the morning, do not be idle in the evening, for you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good. So two halves of the book. The second half of the book is divided into these two major sections of man cannot understand God's work because he cannot understand what's good for man. And then man cannot see what's going to happen. He can't determine his future. There's not, if we could put it this way, there's not a vending machine God where we push the right button and we get a guaranteed result in this life. So if we take the whole book and think about the structure here, At the very beginning and at the very end, we have the messianic wisdom of the Son of David. So just to take a look at that real quick, and then we're going to dig into the text here. Chapter 1, verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem. So this is messianic wisdom from the son of David. Very end of the book, we're going to see something very similar. Chapter 12, verse 11. And we could actually start with verse 9. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge. He pondered, searched out, arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. The words of wise men are like goads, and the masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned, the writing of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. So you have this messianic wisdom of the one shepherd, and what is that wisdom? And here's like the linchpin of the entire book in verse 13 and 14. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments. Fear God, there's the inner man. Keep his commandments, there's both the inner man and the outer man, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act into judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So what is the book about? Chapter 1, verse 1, it's wisdom from the son of David. What is the book about? You get to the end, it is messianic wisdom of the one shepherd. What is that wisdom? Fear God, keep his commandments. Well, then we move chiastically up the pyramid. So immediately after chapter 1, verse 1, we have verses 2 through 11, which talk about the circularity of life. What advantage does a man have in all his work which he does under the sun? Verse 3, a generation comes, a generation goes, the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hastens to the place it rises there again, blowing towards the south, then turning to the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. Just this idea of effort is happening, and yet nothing is being accomplished. Water's pouring into the sea, and yet there's never any material change to the level of the sea because of that. And so you have this description of the circularity of life. Then when we come to the end, we see the same thing in chapter 11, verse 7 through chapter 12, verse 8. We have this description of rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. Follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes, yet know God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. And then we come to chapter 12, which has this really intriguing poem about the characteristic of old age. So do you see what happens here? After the very beginning and just before the very end, you have the circularity of life. You go, and yet nothing is ever accomplished. Go to the end of the book, you are young. How do you live your life so that it is not meaningless? Spinning around but never accomplishing anything. As you're a young man going into old age, how do you think about how you live your life? And then when we come up one more step, that's when we come to the two major sections of the book. Chapter 1, verse 12 through chapter 6, verse 9. Pleasure, wisdom, toil, if those are ends to themselves, you are grasping for wind. But there's a flip side to that, and that's that the gift of God is to be able to eat, drink, and enjoy your labor. And so, even the ability to enjoy your life, we see in the first half of the book, is a gift from God. We all know people who are constantly chasing money is an easy one, constantly chasing more and more money, and yet they never enjoy it. Why? We could come up with a whole bunch of reasons. You're constantly distracted and you're worried about da, 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 da. But at the end of the day, it's because to enjoy life is itself a gift of God. And then the second half of the book, in the middle section, is that from chapter 6, verse 10 to chapter 11, verse 6, man is unable to understand God's work by finding what is good or knowing what will be. There are no hard and fast guarantees of this is how your life's going to turn out in this life. But again, we see the gift of God through this section is again to eat, drink, and to be able to enjoy your labor. So that theme comes up again and again. So let's take a look at text of the book, and this is where you have on your handout. So we start with this challenge, kind of this in-your-face confrontation. All is havel. All is transient. It is enigmatic. It is hard to understand. I mean, we look at life and we go, yeah, it is. It is very transient. A lot of times life is very hard to understand. Why did this happen when we were trying so hard to make that happen? I don't know. Life is havel, hard to understand, and it's frequently unsatisfying. I remember an individual that I worked with where we worked together in the same shop, and he was constantly going, I hate my job. I hate my MOS. I can't wait to get out of this. I put in a transfer to another MOS, another specialty, and I can't wait to be done. And it's going to be so much better over there. And finally, he transferred. And I messaged him about a year later and said, hey, how is life in the new MOS? How are you enjoying yourself? And he came back and he said, it's miserable. It's hard. I'm working with people who don't understand what I'm doing. It's frustrating. Yeah, it's unsatisfying. That's the way life is. And yet, in verse 3 through verse 11, we see all operates according to patterns that God has established, which includes the human life. So that brings up then the question, as we're looking at the winds that blow circularly and what do they really accomplish, as we look at the water that is going and then it goes back to where it started and it goes again, but nothing ever really seems to be accomplished through it. When we look at man's life, where you exist and you think my life is all this and more, and then you die and you're forgotten. How do we think about that, and how do we find true meaning in life? And so he goes through, and starting with chapter 2, chapter 1, verse 12, we start in with the first question. What good is there for man to do? What is good? How would you define good? How are we going to live the good life? And everybody has some idea. Every single person alive has an idea of what the good life means, and they're pursuing it. And the question is, are they going to find the good life? Chapter 1, verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. Initial observation, it is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. And so he Then in verse 16 says, Behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I realized this also is striving after wind. Why? Does wisdom in and of itself, as an end to itself, does that make you satisfied? Is that good? Well, he answers that. In much wisdom, there is much grief. Increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. One time I heard the question, would you rather be the only genius in a world full of idiots or the only idiot in a world full of geniuses? And the point that was being made by that is if you're the only idiot in a world full of geniuses, you're going to walk around feeling stupid all the time. If you're the only genius in a world full of idiots, you look around and you realize everybody's an idiot. And this is terrible. Something of that idea here, increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. There's the phrase ignorance is bliss, and there's something to that. I think all of us know things that deep down we wish we didn't know. Whether that's in how the world operates around us, in circumstances, in relationships. If you've had the relationship where you really looked up to somebody and then you learned something and you walk away going, I wish I didn't know that about them. Increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. So greater wisdom and knowledge as an end to itself does not satisfy. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. He looks at pleasure. So I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. Behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? It's the idea of, okay, if your purpose is to feel good, which is what so many people pursue today in today's sexualized culture and in today's alcohol and drug-addled culture, and if I just feel good, okay, but what does that accomplish? Walking around laughing, I mean, if you look on TikTok and you just see these people who are just cackling like maniacs, and you go, you may be happy, but what a pointless life. Pleasure as an end to itself is not good, even though everybody's pursuing it. So wisdom is not good in and of itself. Pleasure is not good in and of itself. Verses 4 through 11, possessions, accomplishments. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees, which in that culture especially would be the mark of this is a king. He has gardens and is beautiful. I made ponds of water for myself with which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had homeborn slaves, and I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem, and I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasures of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great, increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem, and my wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of my labor, and this was a reward for all my labor. Then I considered all my activities which my hands had done, the labor which I had exerted. And behold, all was vanity and striving after wind. There was no profit under the sun. He develops this later, but it's the idea of, I have made all this, and yet someone's going to come who didn't do it. They're going to take over it. It's going to be ruined. It's going to be lost. It's going to be forgotten. So what's the purpose behind this? Verses 12 through 16. Wisdom doesn't distinguish from foolishness and death. Verse 12. I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except that which has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. Okay, great. Wisdom is better. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Fantastic. And so the wise man lives forever and ever, and the foolish man dies, right? But no. Yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, so it will befall me. So why then have I been extremely wise? So if you're living in wisdom for wisdom as its own end, I just want to be the smartest, wisest, most brilliant person in the room. Enjoy it because you're going to die. And then it really doesn't matter. Verses 17 through 26. All your labor goes to someone who didn't labor for it. I hated the fruit of my labor, which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. You don't get any control over that in your death. I have collected everything possible, and I'm going to give millions to my children. Okay, great. What if your children are scoundrels? Or they're fools? And they take it and they waste it and ruin their lives with riotous living. You can't control what they do with it. And so this too is Havel. It is transient. It is hard to understand. It is frequently unsatisfying. Therefore, I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor, which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. I think we can look at a whole bunch of different examples, including ones like, we could take, for instance, Apple, and you look at Steve Jobs and how he just drove and drove and made the company clawed his way to the top, and then he died. And then it passed over to someone else, and they still put out reasonably good products, but not nearly as good as they were under Steve Jobs. And yet he's dead. Or we could look at everything Elon Musk does, and you could just go, how in the world does one man do all of that? Like a tenth of what he does. And yet he's doing all this. And yet he's going to die, and it's going to pass on to someone else who's going to make really bad business decisions. And eventually it's going to settle into the realm of mediocrity. Verse 22. What does a man get in all his labor and striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. All day long he's laboring, working hard, and miserable, and even at night his mind doesn't rest because he's constantly thinking, what am I going to do tomorrow? What next? What if? What if? What if? What if? This too is Havel. That's why he can say in verse 24, there's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. Why? Because the ability to do that is a gift of God, which he then says, this is also I have seen, that is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? The idea is, it's like if you have all the success in life, it's like you have all these cans of food in front of you, and yet unless God gives you the can opener of being able to enjoy that, you just keep collecting cans and keep collecting cans, but it's ultimately unsatisfying. It is the gift of God that gives you that can opener that allows you to enjoy your life, however much or however little. That's the gift of God. Only he can give enjoyment and satisfaction in life. Chapter 3, we come to the famous poem. There's a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up. Time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to throw stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, a time to shun embracing, a time to search, a time to give up as lost, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart, a time to sew together, a time to be silent, a time to speak, time to love, time to hate, time for war, time for peace. What's the point in this poem? It's that Everything has a counterpart. It is time for me to put things together to build a house. Congratulations. In a few years, some guy's going to come along and say, it is time for me to tear down this house. It is time for peace. Well, guess what? In a generation, it's going to be a time for war. And so there's this almost despairing inevitability of whatever you pursue. Great, enjoy it, because at some point the pendulum is going to come back the opposite direction, and whatever you thought was so important is just going to fade. Which is why he can then say, "What profit," verse 9, "is there to the worker from that in which he toils?" What's the point? What is the profit? Because everything he does is going to be eventually undone. I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. It's this: you as a man on God's creation have been given a task of inevitable futility in and of itself. It continues on. Verses 3 through 13, man desires the eternal. Eternity is set in his heart, but he lives in the temporal. He doesn't get eternity in this life. And yet that drives him in what he does. And he tries to, in one sense, express eternity in what he builds and does. And he thinks, aha, I have put my footprints upon the sands of time. And he takes a few steps and he vanishes and his footsteps are gone. There's this desire for eternity that grips every person, and yet in this life, if that's all there is, it's never fulfilled. Verses 14 and 15. God has already established what will be done. Everything God does will remain forever. Parenthetically, everything man does will not. There's nothing to add to it. There's nothing to take away from it. But God has so worked that men should fear him. And here he starts hinting at the answer. The answer to a successful, good life is bound up in the person of God. It continues, verses 16 and 17. We desire justice, and yet often in this life, as we look, we see justice is denied. And we go, that's hell. It's not how it's supposed to be. Look at, seems like some days most of our government should be in prison, and yet they're not. Verses 18 through 22, all men die, yet no one gets to see what's going to come after him. Who will bring him to see what will occur after him? The parenthetical answer is no, no one. After you die, you don't get to stick around and see how your legacy survives. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, politics and wealth don't satisfy. There's an understatement. Power is often used to oppress, and it's transient. It's hard to understand. It's unsatisfying. Verses 13 through 16, you think, well, maybe if I'm impressive enough and I get to the very top, then people will respect me. Verses 13 through 16, a poor yet wise lad is better than an old and foolish king who no longer knows how to receive instruction. For he has come out of prison to become king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. So here's a king that started at the very bottom, worked his way all the way to the very tip top. Aha, I don't need to listen to anybody because I have done it all. I've seen all the living under the sun throng to the side of the second lad who replaces him. Well, there's encouragement. I got out of prison, worked my way to the very top. Now I'm the king. And here's this young upstart. And what happens? Everybody goes, oh, new guy. Let's follow him. And they forget the king. Where does that leave him? Verse 16, there's no end to all the people, to all who were before them, and even to all those who will come later. Will not be happy with him. This too is vanity and striving after wind. Okay, you set yourself on the pinnacle, but there's this endless flood of people before you and after you that all are just going to sweep you away in the dust of time. You're going to go away. No one's going to care about you because the next guy's come on, and then the next guy, and then the next guy, and the next guy. It's unsatisfying. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. Some people say, well, I'm going to be religious and then God will give me what I want. Guard your steps as you go to the house of God and draw near to listen, rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, because they do not know they're doing evil. Okay, pause. What is the sacrifice of fools? If I bring my sacrifice to God and I put it on the altar and I act really, really, really serious, God will give me what I want. I'll make vows. I'll promise God things. Dear God, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Negotiation to God doesn't work. Don't be hasty. That's what Solomon gets at in verse 2. Don't be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. The dream comes through much effort, and the voice of the fool through many words. Don't be a fool through all your words. When you make a vow to God, don't be late in paying it. Again, it's almost axiomatic. People are in difficult situations, and what do? They start bargaining with God. That's what's being described here. If you make a vow to God, don't be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It's better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Don't let your speech cause you to sin. Do not say in the presence of the messenger that it was a mistake. For why should God be angry on the account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? In many dreams and in many words, there's emptiness. Rather fear God. So this idea, don't use God as a means, don't use religion as a means to try to get what you really want, because that's not going to lead to a satisfying life. Chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in province, don't be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another, and there are high officials over them. Another way of saying, in a fallen world, you should expect to see corruption and injustice. That should not surprise you. It should not be the case that Christians are walking around going, how could this happen in America where we have the Constitution and free speech? You know, Solomon tells us this is how. But he also tells us, for those who would say, well, then we need to just tear the system down and build it up again, brand new. First of all, well, you build it up. What have you just built it up with? Fallen sinful men who are going to oppress. And then secondly, verse 9, after all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. So even in the worst of governments, the worst of government is better than no government. Verse 10 through chapter 6, verse 6, there's a lengthy discussion on riches, how they are transient, they're troublesome, they garner parasites who just want your money, and then you lose them at death. And so he's able to say, better the miscarriage than he. For it, the baby, comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, never knows anything, and is better off than he. The challenge here is then, what is a successful life? Where is meaning found? Well, Solomon then begins the second half, which is So the first half of the question, where is good found? He's hinted at it throughout, the need to fear God. The answer is going to be found at the very end. So in a sense, he kind of leaves you hanging with that big question. So how do I have a good life? How do I have a meaningful life? And the second half of the book is that man cannot fully understand God's work. Chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. He describes how what exists already has been named. And it is known what man, literally, what Adam is the Hebrew word, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. There's this reference back to Adam, who named all the creatures, named all the things, and yet he tried to dispute with God. And in effect say, I know better than God. And yet he didn't, and he ruined his life. And so everything since then, all of man's wisdom apart from God has just been man multiplying words in the same way that Adam did. Many words increase futility. What is the advantage to a man or to Adam? The next section then builds off of that, looking at some of the complexities of life. Can you intuitively know what is good for man? In chapter 7 and chapter 8, the first part of that answers no. Man cannot know what is good for him. Man is not able to discover. So verses 1 through 14, what is good is often not intuitive. Just to take a couple. A good name is better than a good ointment, like good expensive oil. You look at that and you say, which would you rather have, a good name or really expensive perfume? Well, I'd rather have really expensive perfume. Well, no, that's wrong. Good name is better. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. And that, again, is totally backwards from how we would typically think about it. The day of one's birth, all right, life is ahead. I can accomplish things. I can move things. I can shake things. Day of one's death, that's the end. Yeah, I don't like that at all. And yet here Solomon says the day of your death is better than the day of your birth. Why? Because at the end of your death, you get to see what type of character you are. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. Again, who would think that? Okay, here's your choice. What do you want to do for your afternoon activity? Do you want to go to a party, or do you want to go to a house where someone has died and everybody is sobbing? But is that a real question? Take me to the party. Sounds like more fun. And yet Solomon says it is better to go to the house of mourning. Why? Because that is the end of every man. And the living takes it to heart. There's something that takes place within you that fosters wisdom when you see death. We could go through the entire list here and through the first 14 verses and see that theme again and again and again and again. How what you expect and what's actually good for you are often two very different things. Verses 15 through 18, one of the more perplexing verses initially. Is righteousness good? There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness. There's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness. Do not be excessively righteous and don't be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? Do not be excessively wicked and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? Like what is Solomon saying here? This is, again, hitting the same theme. The person who seeks to be wise and righteous, some translations carry the idea of self-righteous, because I'm going to be righteous and wise because somehow that will allow me to control life. Well, no, because sometimes the righteous person dies early and sometimes the wicked person lives into their 80s and 90s and it seems like they never die. It continues. Verses 19 through 22, is man good? No, he's incurably sinful. And you realize that when you hear how your servants speak about you. Verses 23 through 29 is a description of marriage. Verse 26, I discovered more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are chains. One who is pleasing to God will escape from her, but the sinner will be captured by her. Behold, I've discovered this, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation, which I am seeking but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but I've not found a woman among all these. The idea that this is carrying is that when you have a man and a woman in relationship, there is invariably, because of the curse, there's this the man seeking power, the woman seeking to not be under his power. You have this dynamic that starts to develop. And he says, in essence, you look among a guy, you take a guy and you look among all the guys, you may find a bro, if I could put it that way, where it's just like we're not competing with each other. We're just let's hang out. Let's do. But you don't find that with a woman. It's never here's the guy and here's the girl. Hey, gal, let's hang out. Yeah, let's do stuff together. This is great. Yeah, there's a dynamic that develops there. And so, even there, is marriage good? Well, certainly we say it is. It's given by God, but it's often filled with strife that doesn't occur with other people. Chapter 8, I'm going to have to go through some of these for time relatively quickly. Is abandoning or correcting the king good? And Solomon warns against that. Some people, we're having problems. Time for me to cut bait, leave the king. Solomon says, don't do that. Be patient. Exercise your wisdom. Plead with the king. Chapter 8, verse 7 through chapter 9, verse 1, man doesn't know what will happen or when because all is in God's hands. The second half of the second half, so I guess second quarter or the fourth quarter, who can tell a man what will be after him? And the answer is you don't know. So chapter 9, we have this description in the first 9 verses. In one sense, it doesn't matter how you live your life. That has very little to do with how your life actually turns out much of the time. Unexpected things happen. Tragedy strikes. The day's going well and you get that phone call. And yet, you can't control that. So what must you do? Verses 7 through 9, learn contentment. Eat your bread in happiness. Drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all the time. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given to you. This is your reward in life, and in your toil which you have labored under the sun. So instead of wondering what's going to happen, can I control the outcome? Instead, as God gives you the opportunity to enjoy life, enjoy it as a gift from him. And relish that. Be content. Verses 10 through 18. Do the very best you can, but realize you don't know what will happen. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Verse 11, I saw again under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle is to the warriors, nor is the bread to the wise, or wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. There's an element of life that, from a human perspective, looks like chance. From a divine perspective, looks like providence. And yet you don't know how it's going to unpack. And so what do? Man doesn't know his time. Like a fish caught in a net, birds trapped in a snare. No fish goes out, today I'm going to be trapped in a net. So the sons of man are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. And that's reality. Chapter 10. Life doesn't always make sense, but the wise will do right in the face of fools. There's this lengthy description of things happening that are not expected. He who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. If he quarries stones, he may be hurt by them. If he splits logs, he may be endangered by them. You can be doing the right thing, and it doesn't turn out well. And that's the nature of life. And yet, what do you do? End of the chapter. Consider doing what is right and continue doing what is right. Chapter 11. Same idea. You don't know what's going to happen in God's plan. Cast your bread on the surface of the waters. You will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you don't know what misfortune may occur on the earth. How do you live your life? Realize that you don't get to control the outcomes, and there's no certain outcomes from a human perspective. And so you seek to be wise. You take what you have and you divide it 7 ways or to 8, knowing that tragedy may befall way 2, 4, and 6. Because you cannot control that as much as you would like to. If the clouds are full, verse 3, they pour out rain on the earth. Is it going to rain? I don't know. Are the clouds full? Maybe, maybe not. I can't control that. Whether a tree falls to the south or toward the north, wherever the tree falls, there it lies. Sometimes you may be chopping and chopping and chopping, and the tree, I want it to fall to the north, I want it to fall to the north, I want it to fall to the north, and you finish cutting through it and it falls to the south. Well, there it lies. Now you have to decide, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do with the tree? What are you going to do with your life? You were working and working and you're pursuing that dream and pursuing that dream and pursuing that dream, and then that dream just blew up in your face. Okay, the tree's fallen to the south. What are you going to do? How are you going to live your life? Are you going to go, this is so not right? Or are you going to realize you don't ultimately have control over your life? There's someone else who does. Same idea with verse 4. He who watches the wind will not sow. He who looks at the clouds will not reap. Just as you do not know the path of the wind, or how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you don't know the activity of God who makes all things. It is God's providence that makes the tree fall to the north or the south. It's God's providence that makes it the wind blow or the rain fall. So what do? You take your life and you seek to invest it for what you know is right, knowing that God may cause it to flourish and succeed, or God may cause it to fizzle and fail, and that's okay. So what do? Well, if I'm going to fail, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and watch the wind and the weather and just wonder when's the perfect time to start acting. No. Verse 6, sow your seed in the morning and don't be idle in the evening. You don't know whether the morning or the evening sowing will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good. Keep laboring. Take ministry aspect. Is this ministry succeeding or failing? I don't know if it's going to succeed or fail, but we're going to give it a try. And we're also going to try to minister here, and we're going to try to pour into this person's life, and we're going to try to pour into this person's life. In the counseling realm, this is really applicable, because you could have a person, I sowed the seed and the winds were perfect and the rain was falling and it looked so good. And then they just said, yeah, no thanks. And then they turned. Well, what do? Well, clearly you just sit there and say, well, I'm never counseling again because I failed. No. No. Instead, you keep spreading seed. Well, let's try some evening seed. And you don't know whether God is going to make one succeed and one fail, or both of them succeed. Continue to be faithful. So work does not guarantee outcome, but don't allow the potential outcome to dictate your work. Continue laboring. Use your strength, your life while you have it. Expend it for God, because when you come to the very end, it ties it all together. What's the good life? How do we answer the fact that you can labor and labor and labor and labor and labor and labor and labor, and then you watch the whole thing just collapse in front of you, and you go, well, that wasn't fun, and it doesn't really feel very good. What's the answer to those big questions? Last 2 verses. Conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments. What's the good life? Fearing God, keeping his commandments. What do you do when life is uncertain and you don't know whether the tree's going to fall to the north or the south, or the morning sowing or the evening sowing is going to work? What do? Fear God, keep his commandments. Why? Very last verse. Because God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So we look at that and we recognize, if you have been laboring and you have done everything you could to serve, and you have been trying to seek to make your life not bound up in the things of this world, trying to get more possessions and stuff just so you can enjoy it, but rather living your life to fear the Lord and enjoying the blessings that he gives as he gives them, and rejoicing in his kindness and allowing you to enjoy things like a beautiful sunset or a good meal or a wonderful family. You enjoy those, you serve, you continue to do what's right. Why? Because your life will be brought into judgment and it will be evaluated before God. And what you have done, whether it is good or evil, will be evaluated. And so if you said, I want to serve the Lord by making this tree fall to the north, and I want to do everything, Lord Jesus, I want this tree to fall to the north because I believe that would most honor you, and it falls to the south, all your labor will be brought into the evaluation of Jesus Christ. It will be judged. And at that point, you will receive the reward of faithfulness or unfaithfulness. So Ecclesiastes provides us wisdom as to how do we look at the world and the things in it. You cannot look at God's world without God being at the absolute center that drives it. Otherwise, you will continue to be absolutely havel as you pursue all the empty stuff, grasping after wind. And you'll sit there going, but that wasn't supposed to happen in the second half. So apart from the fear of the Lord, nothing satisfies. So this really helps us. Don't be allured by the things of the world. If God gives us abundance, we rejoice in it. We thank him for it. We do enjoy it. And yet, for true and lasting meaning, life must be lived daily in the fear of the Lord. Also, in a fallen world, we expect to see things operating differently than they often are, but that should not surprise us. And we should understand that, as is brought out at different points, God is the one who controls what's taking place in the world, and he knows what he's doing. And so the final point of application, our goal should not be to leave our footprints on the sands of time, but rather that we live a life that comprehends the reality of death and judgment and then lives accordingly, day after day after day after day. So Ecclesiastes, any questions?
Observation.
Sure.
It's hard to reconcile that this is the same Solomon that stood in the temple and met face to face with God and had that exchange. I just want to serve you, Lord. I just want to lead your people. Mm-hmm. It's just hard to see that, but and as it progresses through there, we see there's lots of opportunities for us to see that clearly God is not the focus of this individual attention. It just doesn't feel that way. It doesn't look that way. But at the same time, with all the contrasts, mm-hmm. We have to remember that opportunities abound. We live in a target-rich environment, mm-hmm. To serve, and that we should be spent in the labor of the Lord. Yeah, and that be haggard and callous to Christ, mm-hmm. and don't be a pretty poor. Yeah, and I would say Solomon gives us a really good
warning in that regard, because I would argue through the book, as he's writing it, his focus is on the supremacy of God, because that's what's encapsulated at the very end. But you can see through his life, there were times when he was not thinking that way, and he experienced just how hopeless that was. And because of that, he is now able to say experientially, through the inspiration of the Spirit, this is what makes a good life. And this is how you live life in an uncertain world, is fear God and keep his commandments, because you will be judged. And the other point would be, as we see, the wisest man who ever lived. The question should not be so much, how could the wisest man who ever lived do something so sinful? But rather, we ought to ask, how deceitful and dangerous is sin that it could take the wisest man who ever lived and cause him to fall in such a significant way? Well, let's go ahead and pray. We'll let you go here. I think we got some dessert out there still.